Section 1. The world that hides in plain sight. Go ahead and get comfortable. Pull those blankets up a little further. If you're lying down already, good. If you're sitting in the dark with your phone propped on your chest, and the glow of the screen is the only light in the room, even better. Because what I want to do tonight, what I've been wanting to do for a long time, is walk you through something that I genuinely believe most people have never fully stopped to look at. The Amazing World of Gumball is a children's cartoon. It aired on Cartoon Network beginning in May 2011. It was made by a French animator named Ben Bocquelet, who is working out of a studio in London, and it stars a blue cat named Gumball Watterson, his adopted goldfish brother Darwin, and their family as they navigate the strange, bright, the utterly absurd town of Elmore, California. On the surface, that's the whole thing. A kid's show about a funny cat. You've probably seen it. You might have watched it as a kid, or maybe you put it on in the background once and laughed at a joke before changing the channel. Or maybe your younger sibling watched it and you caught a few episodes by accident and thought, huh, that's actually pretty clever. And you moved on. But here's the thing. If you stayed, if you really stayed and let yourself sink into it, something starts to happen around season 3. The comedy doesn't change. The colors don't change. Gumball is still getting into ridiculous situations, and Darwin is still his sweet, earnest, heart of gold best friend, and Richard is still the most lovably useless father on television. None of that changes. But underneath all of it, you start to notice something. A current. A pull. Like the show is quietly building towards something it knows you're not going to expect, and it's been building toward it since the very first episode, and you just didn't realize it yet. Tonight, I want to follow that current all the way down. This isn't a ranking. This isn't a countdown of the 10 darkest moments, or the 5 most shocking fan theories. What I want to do is much slower and much more deliberate than that. I want to sit with the philosophy of this show, the actual honest-to-goodness ideas that Ben Bocquelet and his writing team, which included James Lamont and John Foster among many others, embedded into what most people assume is a silly cartoon about a cat. I want to talk about what it means to exist, about identity and whether yours was chosen for you, about whether you are the main character of your own life and what happens when you're not, about the fear of being forgotten, about love that survives against all structural logic, and about what it means to keep going in a world that might be watching you, judging you, and might decide at any moment that you're no longer worth keeping around. All of that lives in this show, every single bit of it, and I'm going to show you where. But first, let me tell you about the man who made it. Ben Bocquelet was born in 1980 in France. He studied animation at a school in Angoulême and eventually moved to London, where he spent several years at a studio called Studio AKA working on commercial animation. He was creating characters, pitching them to clients, investing himself in them, and then watching those pitches fail, one after another. The characters he made weren't bought. They weren't used. They were rejected. And they sat in folders and on hard drives and in his head, these little lives he'd given form to that nobody wanted. When he joined Cartoon Network Development Studio Europe in 2007, he brought all those rejected characters with him. And his original pitch for what would become Gumball was almost unbearably on the nose for what the show would eventually become. A series about rejected cartoon characters attending a remedial school. A show about the unwanted, the forgotten, the not good enough. The producers told him that was too sad. So he revised it into a family comedy. He set it in a suburban American town. He named his family after his own family. Nicole after his mother, Richard after his father, Anais after his sister. He built Elmore on the bones of discarded dreams and gave it the structure of something cheerful and light and very, very funny. But the sadness was still in there. He never took it out. He just covered it with bright colors and physical comedy and the most visually inventive animation style that Cartoon Network had ever put on television. He hid it in the most obvious possible place, which is right in front of your face where you're too busy laughing to notice. That's the magic trick. That's what makes this show extraordinary. And I want you to hold that origin story in mind as we go through everything tonight. Because it matters. It matters that Gumball was made by someone who knew what it felt like to pour effort into something and have it rejected. But who knew what it felt like to make a character, to give it a face and a personality and some seed of life, and then watch that character be set aside because it didn't fit the story someone else wanted to tell. Bacale didn't just use those rejected characters as raw material. He built a world for them. He built them a place to be. And then he built the awareness of their rejection into the DNA of that place so that the show would always know what it was made from and what it was protecting. The Watterson family name itself is a tribute to this kind of understanding. Bacale named the family after Bill Watterson, the creator of Calvin and Hobbes, the reclusive genius who made one of the most beloved comic strips in history and then walked away from it entirely. Watterson refused to merchandise his characters, and he refused to license them. He held the line on the integrity of Calvin and Hobbes with a completeness that the commercial world found almost incomprehensible, and when his story was told, he stopped telling it. He chose obscurity over compromise. He let his creation rest rather than extend it past the point of its own meaning. The Wattersons live in a world where that choice would be fatal. In Elmore, walking away is erasure. Choosing obscurity is the void. Watterson could stop making Calvin and Hobbes and still be alive, still be himself, still exist in the world with full continuity of self. But in Gumball, stopping means ending. The creative act of release that Watterson performed as a kind of love becomes, in the world named after him, an act of self-destruction. I don't know if Bacale meant all of that consciously. Well, maybe the name is just a tribute and I'm reading miles of meaning into a coincidence. But the show is full of these moments where the choice of detail seems too precise to be accidental, where the layers stack up too neatly to be unintended, where the whole architecture of it keeps pointing at the same questions, from different angles, with different voices, until the questions become impossible to ignore. What does it mean to create something and then let it go? What does it mean to love something that depends on being watched? What is the relationship between the story and the person telling it, between the character and the audience keeping it alive, between the creative act and the commercial necessity that sustains it? Gumball doesn't answer these questions, but it asks them with such commitment, and across so many episodes and seasons and characters and moments, that the asking becomes its own kind of philosophy, its own way of being in the world. The visual style of Gumball is the first thing anyone notices, and it's already telling you something profound before a single word of dialogue is spoken. The backgrounds of Elmore are photographs of real places. Most of them are from London, where the show was produced. They're photographs of real streets, real buildings, real parks, real shop fronts. And on top of these photographs of the actual, tangible world, the show places animated characters who exist in entirely different visual registers. Gumball and his family are drawn in a clean, expressive, two-dimensional style. Tina Rex, the school bully, is rendered in three-dimensional CGI. The Robinson family next door look like they were made from fabric and foam, like Muppets. Idaho, the potato kid, is claymation. Bobbert, the robot student, is mechanical and geometric. Sussy exists as a literal human chin filmed upside down and stuck with googly eyes, which is maybe the most unsettling visual choice in the history of children's television. And all of these characters, these beings from completely different worlds, completely different mediums, completely different traditions of making things, they all walk the same hallways. They sit in the same classrooms. They live in the same town. They don't fit together, and that's entirely the point. Ben Bacale told an interviewer from Squiggly Animation magazine that he was influenced by Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and that he loved the idea of cartoon characters living in a tangible, physical world. He said he wanted young children to believe they could visit Elmore. He wanted it to feel real. And there's something deeply charming about that intention, and also something quietly terrifying about the result. Because what you've created, when you put all of these mismatched beings into one world, is a place where nobody fully belongs. Every single resident of Elmore is a stranger to the world they're living in. The two-dimensional characters exist in a three-dimensional photograph. The CGI characters exist alongside hand-drawn ones. The claymation characters exist beside digital ones. Nobody's aesthetic matches anybody else's. Nobody was made for this particular world. They were all made for other things, other shows, other stories, other lives that never happened. And here they are anyway, making the best of it. If that doesn't already feel like a metaphor for something, just give it a moment. The show premiered on Cartoon Network in May 2011 and ran for 6 seasons, concluding in June 2019 with an episode called The Inquisition that we will absolutely get to. It won the International Emmy Kids Award. It won British Academy Children's Awards. It received widespread critical praise, and it developed a devoted fan community that has spent years digging into every frame, every background detail, every throwaway line looking for what's underneath. Because there's always something underneath. That's the promise Gumball makes from the very beginning, even if it takes you a season or two to hear it being made. The show tackles philosophy, marriage, cyberbullying, mental illness, political intolerance, the human condition. And it does all of this while being, on every surface level, a comedy about a blue cat who cannot stop causing problems. That tension, between the comedic surface and the philosophical interior, is not accidental. It was designed that way. It's the whole architecture of what this show is. So close your eyes if you want, or let them drift to wherever they drift when you're half awake, and let me take you to Elmore. Not the funny version you see when you're laughing at the jokes, the real one. The one that hides underneath, patient and quiet and waiting for you to finally notice it. Take a breath, let's go. If you're enjoying this so far, I'd love to know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is wherever you are. Drop it in the comments, time and place. I always love seeing where these videos find people, and if you haven't subscribed yet, hitting that button means a lot and keeps this channel going. Now, let's keep going. Section 2. The Architecture of Elmore. A world designed to be watched. There's a moment in the Season 3 episode called The Signal, where Gumball and Darwin are having what passes for a normal day in Elmore, which is to say, things are already strange, but in a familiar way. And then reality begins to glitch. Their sentences get cut off mid-word. Scenes jump forward without warning. The world stutters and skips like a satellite broadcast losing its connection. And Gumball notices. He can feel it happening, even if he can't name what it is. The episode is presented entirely as a television signal disruption. Not a narrative one, a literal one. But the show itself appears to be malfunctioning. Characters repeat lines, actions loop, time skips. The episode doesn't offer an in-universe explanation for why this is happening. There's no disaster, no villain, no magical artifact causing the problem. The signal is just degrading, and the characters experience this as reality coming apart at the seams. This is the show telling you, as clearly as it knows how, that Elmore's existence is contingent on a broadcast, that the characters live on a frequency, that they exist as information being transmitted to an audience, and any interruption in that transmission threatens their physical reality. And the show doesn't play this as a horror, it plays it as an inconvenience. Gumball is frustrated, not existentially shattered, but he experiences the glitches the way you or I would experience a buffering video, with mild irritation, a quick sigh, and then getting on with things. Somehow that makes it worse, because it means this isn't new. The signal has always been fragile. The characters have always been one bad connection away from ceasing to exist. They've just learned to live with it. The visual world of Elmore is built on a foundational tension that I want you to really sit with. The show uses real-world photographic backgrounds, streets and buildings and parks photographed in and around London, as the environment where animated characters live. This was a deliberate choice by Bockelay, who worked in commercial animation and knew how to give environments a sense of physical weight. He wanted children to believe they could visit Elmore. But he wanted the town to feel like somewhere real. But then he populated that real-feeling background with characters who are, each and every one of them, from somewhere else. Gumball's family are drawn in a clean animated style. The Robinsons next door look like puppets. Their son Rocky looks like a puppet too, but a different kind, more like felt craft than his parents' sophisticated foam. The dinosaur student Tina Rex is rendered in glossy three-dimensional computer graphics. Idaho is claymation. Ocho, the 8-bit spider who lives in constant, simmering rage, looks like he escaped from a 1980s arcade game. He's rendered in pixels, literal pixels, in a world of photographs. None of them match each other. None of them match the world they're in. Every character in Elmore is visually foreign to the place they inhabit. They're all outsiders. They're all wearing the wrong skin for the world they're walking around in. And the fact that this reads as charming and funny rather than alienating is one of the genuine miracles of the show's execution. But if you let yourself think about what it actually means, what it would feel like to exist in a world that wasn't built for you, surrounded by beings who were also all built for other things, all different, all unable to fully fit, then the comedy curdles just a little bit into something more melancholy. Elmore is a home for things that don't have a home anywhere else. That was literally Bockley's original concept before he revised it into a family sitcom. A school for rejected cartoon characters. A place where the unwanted could find each other. And here's where the architecture of the show becomes genuinely philosophical. Well, because what does it mean to be rejected? What does it mean to be a character who wasn't good enough for the story you were made for? The characters of Elmore, the original ones, the ones Bockley carried over from his failed commercial pitches, didn't choose to exist. They were designed for purposes that never materialized, and then they ended up here instead. Their identities, their physical forms, their visual personalities, all of it was determined by needs they had no part in defining. A character was made to sell snacks. A character was made to pitch an insurance product. A character was made to star in an animated short that never got funded. And now they're students at Elmore Junior High sitting in Miss Simeon's class trying to figure out who they are. That's not just a creative origin story. Within the internal logic of the show, it's a philosophical condition. The characters of Elmore exist because someone imagined them, and they exist in their current forms because that imagining was for a purpose that didn't pan out. Their existence is an accident of creative momentum. They're here because Bockley didn't throw them away when he could have. And the show, remarkably, knows this about itself. It builds this knowledge into the fabric of Elmore's reality. The world has a mechanism for dealing with this, for dealing with characters whose existence doesn't quite justify itself. And that mechanism is called the void. But we'll get to that. First, let's talk about what Elmore rewards and what it punishes. The show operates on a comic logic that most animated series use, but few ever make explicit: the episodic reset. Every episode, things happen. Buildings get destroyed. Relationships get shaken. Terrible events occur. Characters are humiliated, injured, transformed, and otherwise put through the narrative ringer. And then the episode ends, and the next one begins, and everything is more or less back to normal. This is standard procedure for animated television. The Simpsons does it, SpongeBob does it, every cartoon does it because it's practical. You can't have permanent consequences in a serialized comedy, or you run out of story very quickly. And the audience understands this implicitly. We accept the reset the way we accept the laws of physics in our own world. It just is. But Gumball doesn't let you accept it. Gumball makes the reset visible. In the Season 2 finale called The Finale, the episodic reset actually stops working. In every consequence of every episode, all the property damage, all the harm done to other characters, all the chaos the Watterson family has been responsible for across 2 seasons, catches up with them simultaneously. Every citizen of Elmore appears with a grievance. Larry, who works 38 jobs across town and has been abused and disrespected by the Watsons more times than anyone can count, makes the case for how they've damaged his life. The school, the city, the entire community shows up to hold the family accountable. And the episode ends not with resolution, but with a fourth wall nudging suggestion that the only way out is to reset again. To pretend none of it happened, to wipe the slate clean and start the next season fresh. The show is not just acknowledging its own structure here, it's critiquing it. It's saying that the episodic reset, the thing that makes ongoing comedy possible, is also a form of injustice. The characters who are harmed by Gumball's chaos don't get a reset. The world that suffers the consequences of every wild adventure doesn't get wiped clean. Only the Wattersons get to start fresh. Only the protagonists get the reset. Everyone else lives in the wreckage. That's not just a meta joke about animation. That's a genuine observation about narrative privilege, about how stories center certain lives and treat the suffering of others as acceptable collateral, about how being the main character means never really being accountable because the story always needs you to be available for the next adventure. The show was noted by critics and by Wikipedia itself for commenting on topics considered serious or mature, including philosophy, marriage, and the human condition. But it does this without ever fully breaking its comedic surface. The darkness exists in the show the way pressure exists underwater. You can't always see it, but the further you go down, the more you feel it. Let me tell you about how the town looks from above. There's a moment in The Night, a season 5 episode that follows different characters through what they're doing while Elmore sleeps, where the camera pulls back from the town and you see the whole of it at once. This tiny arrangement of buildings, this microscopic society, and you realize that Elmore is all there is. There are no neighboring towns. There are no major cities on the horizon. There are no highways leading anywhere that matters. It's just Elmore, sitting in its own light, and surrounded by darkness on every side. That image has stayed with me, a small bright thing floating in the dark. Every character, every family, every relationship, every dream and fear and secret, all contained within this one little place, with nothing but the night beyond its edges. It's lonely in a way that's hard to put into words. And in that context, everything that happens in Elmore, every argument, every adventure, every moment of connection, takes on a different weight. There's nowhere else to go. There's no escape. There's just this, whatever this is, and it has to be enough. And mostly, remarkably, it is. The show is fundamentally about people making Elmore enough, making their strange, impossible, structurally ridiculous lives into something worth having. And that is, at its core, a deeply human impulse dressed up in very funny clothing. There's another episode that drives this home in a way I keep returning to. In the test, Gumball takes an online personality quiz that tells him he's the loser of the sitcom he inhabits, the butt of the joke, the one who's there to be laughed at. And Gumball, deeply unsettled by this categorization, tries to change. He tries to be less himself. He tries to stop performing the role the quiz assigned to him because the idea that his identity is just a role, one among many in a standardized personality inventory, is genuinely threatening to him. Who wants to be told that they're the loser? Who wants to be told that their entire personality is just a narrative function? But the moment he stops being the loser, something alarming happens. Now, Tobias, one of Gumball's classmates, a character who has always desperately wanted to be the main character, who has tried and failed to be the center of the story on multiple occasions, steps into the vacuum. The show literally reorganizes itself around Tobias as the new protagonist. The visual style shifts. Laugh tracks appear from nowhere. The whole tone transforms into something cheaper and more obviously commercial. A parody of the kind of sitcom that doesn't trust its audience and has to signal when to laugh. And the world reorients itself around this new center. Surakima, the meta-aware fan character who understands narrative structure better than almost anyone because she's been watching it from outside, explains what's happening. Nature hates a vacuum, she tells Gumball. If he won't be the loser, someone else has to be. The role doesn't disappear because someone refuses it. The role persists, and the universe finds whoever will fill it. Gumball reclaims his role eventually by doing what he does best, leaning into it entirely, embracing every aspect of his personality that the quiz called loser and deploying it with full force. He gets his world back. And then, in a structural joke that functions as a philosophical commentary, the whole episode is revealed to have been Tobias's dream. Because, Sarah points out, with Tobias as the main character, having it all turn out to be a dream is structurally inevitable. That's the kind of cheap narrative cop-out that a Tobias-centered story would rely on. Think about what that means, though. But think about what the episode is saying about roles and identity and the relationship between who you are and what the story needs you to be. Gumball's identity isn't separable from his narrative function. He is the loser of this sitcom because the loser is what he is. Not as an insult, as a description of his place in the architecture of Elmore. And the episode isn't saying that's sad, or not only sad. It's saying that knowing your place in the story doesn't diminish you. It might be the only honest foundation you have to build on. Gumball is most himself when he's most fully the thing the quiz called him. His authenticity and his narrative role are the same thing. And the terror isn't that he's been assigned a role, but that he was afraid the role was lesser than he deserved. It isn't. No role is lesser than another in the story that actually needs it. The loser is as important as the hero. The background character is as real as the protagonist. The difference is whether anyone bothers to look. The show built its entire world on that idea, and it hid the idea inside jokes about quizzes and alternate protagonists and dreams within dreams, so that you'd absorb it before you had a chance to argue with it. Section 3. Rob, the character who woke up. His name is Rob. He's a tall, blue, single-eyed cyclops, and he starts the show as nothing. Not a character with a small role. Not a minor recurring figure with 1 or 2 lines per season. Nothing. He's a background character in the first 2 seasons of the amazing world of Gumball. Someone who appears in crowd scenes at Elmore Junior High, standing near other students, filling space, existing with no name, no story, no family, no development, no reason to be noticed. If you went back and watched the first 2 seasons right now, you probably couldn't pick him out. That's not a failure of your memory. That's the point. The show confirmed this. Rob was there in the background for 2 full seasons, and nobody noticed. Not the audience, not the characters within the story. He was just there, occupying space the way a lamp in the corner of a room occupies space. Present, but functionally invisible. And then in a Season 3 episode called The Void, we learn what happened to him. The Void is introduced through a different character first. Molly is a gray dinosaur-like girl who was a minor character in Season 1. She appeared in a few episodes, never had a major storyline, and then simply wasn't there anymore. By Season 3, Gumball, Darwin, and Mr. Small realize they can barely remember her. She's not in the yearbook where she should be. There's a missing locker at school, locker 116, between 115 and 117, that shouldn't be missing. Something has been removed. Something has been erased. What they discover is a dimension made of television static, a place where the universe sends everything it considers a mistake. Failed products, fads that have outlived their cultural moment, outdated technology, and characters. Characters who the universe has decided are too uninteresting, too underdeveloped, too narratively unjustifiable to continue existing. Molly was sent there because the universe decided she was boring. The show plays this for comedy, a darkly casual acknowledgement that reality has quality control standards, and if you don't meet them, you simply get erased from the fabric of the world and everyone forgets you ever lived. That's already one of the bleakest concepts in the history of children's animation. But here's what makes it worse. While Gumball and Darwin are in the void rescuing Molly, Rob is there. He's been there for who knows how long. You can see him in the background of the void scenes if you look carefully. This glitching, distorted version of the blue Cyclops from the crowd scenes, watching Gumball and Darwin from a distance, trying to get their attention. They walk right past him. They rescue Molly. They make their escape. And Rob grabs onto the back of Mr. Small's van as it passes, holding on with everything he has, and the void tries to reclaim him. It tears at him. It warps him. It pulls at his geometry and his coherence and his sense of self, and by the time he drags himself back into the real world, he is physically disfigured. His body has become polygonal and glitching. His head looks like a cracked television screen. He is literally made partly of static now. He hides in the Watterson family's basement for months with amnesia, not knowing who he is or what happened to him, only knowing that he doesn't belong anywhere. When Gumball and Darwin finally find him in an episode called The Nobody, he tells them simply, "I'm a nobody. I have no place in this world." And that is not self-pity. That is a factual description of his situation. He was declared, by the logic of the world he lives in, unworthy of existence. He was thrown into a dimension of static, and everyone forgot he was ever alive. He clawed his way back at the cost of his physical form. And now he's sitting in a basement with no memory of himself, introducing himself as a nobody because that's the most accurate thing he can call himself. What do you do with that information? What Gumball and Darwin do, in their well-meaning but characteristically thoughtless way, is suggest he reinvent himself. They observe that Elmore already has a hero, a sidekick, a love interest, a class clown. All the standard narrative roles are filled, but there's one role that's currently vacant. Elmore doesn't have a villain, and Rob, desperate for any identity, any reason to exist, any role that justifies his continued presence in the world, takes it. He becomes the bad guy not because he wants to do harm, but because being the villain is the only open position in the story, because the alternative is being a nobody again. Because he has learned, at profound personal cost, what happens to characters without a role in the narrative. He becomes a villain to survive. In the Season 4 episode called The Disaster, which is probably the single most important episode in terms of the show's philosophical architecture, Rob confronts Gumball with a device called the Universal Remote, a thing that can rewind, pause, fast forward, and manipulate reality as though reality were a television broadcast. Rob uses this device to rewind time and undo aspects of Gumball's life, creating a version of events where Gumball's family forgets him, his girlfriend Penny leaves him, and his entire social world crumbles. But before he does any of that, he talks. And what he says is the key to everything. He tells Gumball that he never wanted to be the villain. He wanted to be the cute sidekick, the fan favorite, the character who gets merchandise and eventually a spin-off. He wanted to matter. He wanted to be someone that people thought about. But in Gumball's story, in Gumball's amazing world, the protagonist gets everything and everyone else exists to serve the protagonist's story. So the only way for Rob to escape that hierarchy, to carve out any space for himself, was to go around it, to eliminate the protagonist and take his place. And here's the part that makes this extraordinary rather than just said, Rob isn't wrong. Everything he says is accurate. The show agrees with him, the camera angles agree with him. The narrative structure of every episode agrees with him. The world does revolve around Gumball. Other characters do exist primarily to serve Gumball's story. The system is exactly as rigged as Rob says it is. He's not a bitter, mistaken character raging at imagined injustice. He's a character who has correctly identified the mechanism of his own oppression and found himself without any good options for dealing with it. He's screaming into a void, and the void answers. The void has always been listening. The resolution of the two-part episode, which also includes a follow-up called The Rerun, is one of the most quietly devastating things the show ever does. Gumball, having been ejected into the void and having experienced something approaching real fear and real helplessness, reaches out to Rob. He tries to help him. He apologizes genuinely for how he and Darwin treated Rob's situation when they found him in the basement. He offers friendship. And Rob, seeing this genuine act of care, possibly the first one anyone has offered him since before he was thrown into the void, makes a choice. He uses the universal remote to rewind time to before all of this happened. He undoes the damage he caused. He fixes things. And in doing so, he erases Gumball's memory of their reconciliation. The rewind puts them back to being enemies. Rob gives up the one chance he had at connection in order to repair the destruction he caused. He sacrifices his only friendship to be good. And nobody remembers. Nobody knows what he gave up. He carries it alone back to the role he never wanted, back to being the bad guy. Because that's what the story needs from him, and because he is better than the story that constrains him. By Season 6, Rob has figured out something that no other character in Elmore has managed. He's pieced together what the void actually is at a cosmological level. It's not just a garbage dimension for characters the universe deems mistakes. It's cancellation. It's what happens when the story ends. If the show gets canceled, if the audience stops watching, if the broadcast signal goes dark, the void doesn't just take the boring characters. It takes everything. Every building, every street, every memory. Elmore ceases to exist in its entirety. Rob knows the end is coming. He has seen enough of the void to understand what it wants and what it's capable of. And so in the series finale, in The Inquisition, on the 240th and final episode of the main run, the episode that ends with a freeze frame of Rob falling into the opening void, he tries to save everyone. He disguises himself as a school superintendent named Superintendent Evil, infiltrates Elmore Junior High, and begins forcibly transforming every student and teacher into live-action human beings. His plan is to make them real, to give them physical form in the actual world, our world, so that when Elmore is consumed by the void, they will survive it. He's trying to smuggle an entire cartoon cast into reality. Nobody listens. Nobody believes him. Nobody even lets him finish explaining because he's the villain, and that's his role. And in the story, villains don't get to be right about things. Tina Rex knocks him unconscious before he can make his case. Gumball and Darwin undo his plan, thinking they're stopping something terrible. And when they celebrate, the ground beneath Rob begins to crack. The void arrives. It starts with him. The character who tried to warn everyone falls first, screaming into the dark, and the screen freezes on him mid-fall. And that is how the show ends for years. Rob is right. His victory is the world's destruction. The hero wins and loses simultaneously, never knowing the difference. I think about Rob often, not just as a fictional character, but as a representative of something larger. He is the cosmic version of a feeling that most people have experienced at some point, of being overlooked, of being told explicitly or implicitly that your feelings don't matter because you're not the main character of this particular story. Of being assigned a role you didn't choose and finding that the role defines how everyone treats you, regardless of who you actually are underneath it. Of screaming for help and being walked past because you're in the background and the background doesn't count. He's the character who woke up in a story that didn't want him to be awake. And once you're awake, you can't go back. You can only decide what to do with the knowledge. In the revival series, The Wonderfully Weird World of Gumball, which premiered on Hulu in July 2025, Rob is saved from the void by a mysterious figure and given a new purpose. To protect Elmore, to act as a guardian against the void's return. He's still operating in the shadows, still doing necessary, dangerous work that nobody will know about or credit him for. He sacrifices himself again. In an episode called The Rewrite, choosing to fall back into the void rather than risk Gumball and Darwin discovering the truth about their world. Because that discovery would trigger the void's destruction all over again. He keeps giving things up. He keeps choosing self-erasure in service of people who will never fully understand what he does for them. He becomes a hero by becoming a nobody again, voluntarily this time, because he has decided that the world surviving matters more than him being recognized within it. I don't know if there's a more complete character arc in modern animation. He starts as nothing. He becomes conscious. He becomes furious. He becomes, through his own efforts and suffering, something like wise. And he ends up exactly where he started, invisible, unnoticed, not holding the wall against the dark. Except now he chose it. That's not tragedy. That's something rarer. That's dignity. There's one more dimension to Rob that I want to sit with before we move on, because I think it's the most personally resonant thing the show does with his character. Rob is essentially a person who became aware that their entire existence was designed for someone else's entertainment. And that's not just a cartoon problem. Think about how many people in the real world feel that way. The one who always has to be responsible. The one who exists in someone else's story as a supporting character at best, a background detail at worst. The friend who's always there when the main character needs them and invisible when they don't. The family member who holds everything together and gets thanked by no one because holding things together is what they do, not who they are. Rob is the cosmic, made literal version of what it feels like to be overlooked in a world that insists on having a protagonist and treating everyone else as scenery. And the show doesn't resolve that feeling. It doesn't fix it with a speech about how everyone matters equally or a heartwarming moment where the protagonist finally sees the background character as a full person. Those things happen. Gumball does reach out to Rob, does try to help him, but then the rewind happens and it's gone. The kindness is erased. The connection is unmade. The only record of it is in Rob's memory because he's the only one who remembers. He carries the proof that he mattered alone. Thus, that's the show's most honest and least comfortable statement on what it feels like to exist in the margins of other people's lives. You might have moments of genuine connection, real recognition, real warmth. And those moments might get erased by the machinery of the world moving on. And you keep those moments anyway, in the only place they can live, inside yourself, and you keep going. Section 4. The Void. When cancellation is cosmic horror. Let's talk about the thing that sends people to the void. According to the show's internal logic, the void is a dimension that exists beyond the perceived reality of Elmore. It's vast. Its background looks like television static, on that particular visual noise you used to see on channels that weren't broadcasting, that hiss and grain of a signal receiving nothing. It's filled with floating objects, glitching fragments, things that have been removed. and things go there when they are deemed mistakes. Molly went there for being boring. Rob went there for being a nobody. 1980s Hairspray went there for being toxic. The Keytar went there for being a fad. An old prototype of the Watterson family house went there because it was discarded. The Hindenburg Zeppelin is in the void. Pluto, or rather Elmore's version of Pluto after its demotion from planet status, is in the void. A cassette tape, a pogo ball, every piece of dated pop culture, every failed product, every character who wasn't entertaining enough, every concept that outlived its moment. All of it gathering in static, waiting in a place where time has no meaning and nothing changes and nobody remembers you ever existed. The show presents this as a fact of life in Elmore. The universe has quality control standards. This is simply how it works. And because it's presented alongside jokes about Richard trying to eat his way through an enormous pizza, it reads as funny rather than horrifying. You laugh, you move on, and the show has its hand in your pocket the whole time. Because think about what it actually means. Every character in Elmore exists because the void hasn't decided they're a mistake yet. Every student at Elmore Junior High, every shopkeeper and teacher and parent and stranger walking down the street, all of them are on something like probation. Their continued existence depends on their continued relevance. Their right to occupy space in the world is contingent on whether they're interesting enough, useful enough, and entertaining enough to justify their continued presence. If they become boring, if they stop serving a narrative purpose, if they slip from memorable to forgettable in the eyes of whatever force governs Elmore's existence, they get erased. And when they get erased, everyone forgets them. Immediately. Completely. Not the slow, sad forgetting of real life where memories fade over years. Instant, total erasure. Molly's picture disappears from yearbooks. Her locker ceases to exist. The students who sat next to her in class cannot remember her name. She is retroactively removed from the fabric of reality so thoroughly that the world doesn't even have a gap where she used to be. The world just closes around the space she occupied and seals shut. That's not a dark theory. That's what the show explicitly tells us is happening in the void. It's canon. The world of Elmore operates on a principle of conditional existence. You're allowed to be here for as long as you're worth keeping. The moment you stop being worth keeping, you stop being. And the world doesn't miss you because the world doesn't remember you were ever there. Now put that next to what we know about Rob's time in the void. He watched Gumball and Darwin walk right past him. He cried out. He reached for them. They couldn't hear him. They couldn't see him, not really. He was there. His mind was fully present. His sense of self was intact enough for him to reach out, to try, but the narrative didn't need him, and so the narrative made him invisible. The void wasn't punishing him for being bad. It wasn't punishing him for anything. It was simply enforcing a rule that nobody consented to and nobody can appeal. Be interesting, be necessary, be useful to the story, or stop existing. And here's where the philosophical weight of this becomes almost unbearable if you let yourself actually feel it. The characters of Elmore don't know about this rule. Most of them have no idea the void exists. They go about their lives, they have crushes, they argue with their parents, they worry about school, they try to connect with each other, completely unaware that their ability to do any of those things is contingent on factors entirely outside their control. They're performing relevance without knowing that performance is what keeps them alive. They're being interesting without knowing that being boring is a death sentence. They're surviving without knowing there was anything to survive. Only a handful of characters ever learn the truth. Rob knows. Banana Barbara, the prophetic banana who sees the future through her paintings, seems to understand it in her own fractured way. And Gumball, as we'll get into later, knows something is wrong even if he can't articulate it. But for most of the population of Elmore, the rules that govern their existence are completely invisible to them. There's a word for that. It's called the unconscious. The systems that determine the shape of your life operating below the level where you can see them or engage with them. And the void is the show's way of externalizing that, of making the invisible visible, of showing you the machinery that operates underneath the colorful surface of daily life. The void is presented as the show's overarching antagonist in several wikis and fan resources, and that framing is correct. But it's the force that everything in Elmore is, at some level, struggling against. Larry's 38 jobs are a damage defense against the void. Gumball's relentless chaos seeking is a defense against the void. Even Rob's villainy was, at its root, a defense against the void. Being the antagonist was better than being a nobody, because at least antagonists are part of the story. The fan community has developed a theory about Larry, the eternally working everyman of Elmore, that I find extraordinarily compelling. The theory suggests that Larry doesn't hold 38 jobs because he's a particularly hardworking person. The theory suggests that Larry holds 38 jobs because he's terrified. He's terrified of the void. He knows, on some level, what happens to characters without a purpose. And so he has made himself the most essential person in Elmore, the one person whose absence literally causes civilization to collapse, as shown in the episode The Pizza. Because as long as he's indispensable, as long as he's keeping the lights on for everyone else, the void can't justify removing him. He's working himself to exhaustion, and apparently never sleeping, as the night implies, not out of ambition or even habit. Out of existential terror so deep and so old that he's probably stopped being able to name it. That's the dark mirror of Rob's story. Rob was erased for being useless. Larry is enslaved for being essential. Two sides of the same equation. In Elmore, you either matter so little that reality deletes you, or you matter so much that reality will not release you. There is no comfortable middle ground. There is no version of existence that is easy. You are either forgotten or imprisoned. And the void is the thing that decides which. What Backley and his team understood, building this cosmology, was that the void isn't really about cartoons. It's about the economy of attention. In a world where your value is determined by how much other people notice you, how much other people need you, how entertaining or useful you are. In that world, the fear of becoming irrelevant is the deepest and most elemental fear there is. It's the fear underneath the fear of death because at least death is remembered. Becoming irrelevant is worse. Becoming irrelevant means disappearing without a trace, without mourning, without anyone noticing the gap you left. The void is that fear made physical, made real. That made into something that lives in a dimension of television static and takes people away in the night. And Elmore keeps dancing because the alternative is standing still, and standing still is how you get noticed by the wrong thing. I want to linger here for a moment because I think the specific mechanics of how the void erases people deserves more attention than it typically gets. It's not just that you disappear, it's that you're retroactively removed. The yearbook entries vanish. The photograph develops without the person in it. The locker number that should exist doesn't. The memories of classmates who sat next to you for years don't just fade. They're surgically excised, replaced with a seamless absence that looks exactly like nothing was ever there. That distinction matters. Fading from memory is something we understand. It happens slowly, painfully, in a way that at least acknowledges the time you had. What the void does is different. It doesn't fade you. It asserts that you were never there. It retroactively denies your existence with such completeness that the gap you leave closes up and the world is perfectly, smoothly, undeniably intact without you. There's no scar, there's no shadow, there's no moment where someone half remembers something that they can't quite place. Some person-shaped feeling in the back of their consciousness that might, if pressed, yield something like your name. The void takes all of that too. It leaves nothing to be recovered. And the show asks, what does it mean to exist in a world where that can happen? What does it mean to form attachments, to build relationships, to invest yourself in a community and a life? Like when the mechanism of the world you live in is capable of undoing all of it so thoroughly that the people you loved will not be able to remember that they loved you, it means every connection is provisional. It means nothing you build is structurally secure. It means you are, at all times, depending on the continued relevance of your own existence to protect the reality of everything you are. You have to keep being interesting enough to stay, and your relationships have to stay interesting enough to survive, and the world has to keep finding you worth keeping, or everything ends and nobody notices. Gumball does not let you sit with that thought for very long before cutting to another joke. That's the deal. That's always been the deal. The show gives you the weight and then immediately lightens it, not because the weight isn't real, but because carrying it constantly is not how you live a life. You feel it, and then you put it down, and then you laugh, and then the next episode starts. That rhythm, Wait, then laughter, then wait, then laughter is the most honest thing about Gumball. More honest than any single moment of darkness it produces. Life is exactly that rhythm for most people, most of the time. The hard things don't take over. They intersperse. They arrive between the funny moments and the ordinary ones and the good days and the inexplicably pleasant afternoons, and you feel them, and you keep going, and eventually you're laughing again. The void is always there. But so is the town. So is the light. Section 5, Nicole and Richard. The weight of love and the cost of carrying it. Nicole Watterson is the mother of the Watterson family. She works at the Rainbow Factory. She can run faster than the speed of sound. She can generate what appear to be shockwaves with her fists. In the episode The Fury, she engages in a fight that can only be described as a shonen anime sequence, trading energy blasts, performing martial arts that would challenge the laws of physics on their best day. And she wins, definitively and completely. She is also the most quietly tragic character in the show, and most people miss it because the tragedy is covered in comedy. Everything about Nicole's pain is presented through the lens of jokes. Her rage is played for laughs. Her inability to relax is the setup for comedic escalation. Her superhuman competitiveness is a running gag. The show keeps you laughing at the surface while the interior quietly aches. But then Season 5, Episode 6 happens. It's an episode called The Choices, and everything about Nicole becomes clear. The episode takes place during a chaotic family dinner where Nicole, overwhelmed by the noise and the mess and the general Wattersonness of her life, drifts into memory. And through a series of reflective flashbacks, we watch her life from early adolescence through the present. We see her parents, Daniel Senecourt, who has a temper, a bad one. The kind of temper that makes itself known in large physical ways. And Mary Senecourt, a perfectionist. The kind of perfectionist who looks at her daughter's straight A report card and finds the F next to the letter, denoting her gender, and says coldly, "Being a girl is not an excuse." The kind of perfectionist who watches her daughter about to run a karate tournament on foot because their car broke down and shouts, as a send-off, "Second place is first place for losers." Nicole grew up in a household where love and control were indistinguishable, where achievement was the only acceptable offering, where falling short of impossible standards wasn't met with encouragement or compassion, but with disappointment that felt like its own kind of violence. And she internalized all of it, not just the perfectionism that she kept consciously and turned into a discipline, but the rage. She carries her father's rage the way you carry something you didn't choose to pick up but couldn't put down once you had it. The show later confirms in The Parents that Nicole was estranged from her family for 20 years. She left at 18 and didn't look back, because looking back meant walking back into something that had hurt her. When she finally reconnects with her parents in that episode, the old wounds reopen immediately. The arguments surface within minutes. The expectations that she never managed to meet and could never stop trying to meet are still there, unchanged, waiting. Her parents missed her, genuinely missed her, but missing someone and actually changing are entirely different things. And the show knows this and treats it with real honesty. Nicole chose Richard, not because Richard was what her parents wanted, quite the opposite. Her parents didn't attend their wedding. They didn't approve. They never came to see who Nicole had chosen to build her life with. And Richard is, by almost every conventional metric, not what you'd call ambitious. He sleeps, he eats, he watches television. But he is the show's characterization of what a stay-at-home dad looks like when left entirely to his own devices, which is less engaged primary caregiver and more large, cheerful, unreservedly happy adult man who has made peace with napping as a lifestyle. But here's what the show understands about this relationship and what makes The Choices one of the most genuinely moving episodes of any animated series I've ever encountered. Nicole didn't choose Richard in spite of what he is. She chose him because of it. Because Richard, for all his fundamental uselessness in the conventional world, is gentle. He doesn't demand, he doesn't push, he doesn't rage. He doesn't set impossible standards and then punish her when she fails to meet them. He is, for Nicole Senecourt, who grew up in a house full of demand and disappointment, the antidote. The thing she needed without knowing she needed it. The one person in her life who has never made her feel like she wasn't enough. The cost of that choice is that she carries everything. Every bill, every crisis, every responsibility, every catastrophic outcome of every time the rest of the family is left to their own devices. She works at the Rainbow Factory. She manages the household. She single-handedly prevents the family from causing the actual apocalypse on at least a few occasions. The pizza demonstrates conclusively that without Larry in his role and without Nicole in hers, civilization itself begins to fail. She's the backbone of a family that would cease to function without her, and she has always been this, since before she even had a family, because that's what her childhood trained her for. The rage is the tell. Nicole's anger, as enormous and volcanic and genuinely frightening as it is, and it is genuinely frightening, the show is not exaggerating when it treats her anger as a force of nature, that anger is the pressure valve on a life of impossible demands. She was never allowed to be less than extraordinary. She has been performing extraordinary for so long that she no longer knows how to perform anything else. When she tries to relax, in the painting, where the school suggests she practice calm, she literally cannot do it. Her nervous system has been calibrated for crisis mode since childhood. Rest feels like danger. Stillness feels like something is wrong. The show plays this as comedy. Look at Nicole failing to relax, isn't that funny? But underneath the joke is a woman whose entire regulatory system was shaped by a childhood that never let her rest. She's strong because she has to be. She carries the family because the narrative demands a competent adult. She is terrifying in anger because she inherited a temper she couldn't leave behind. And she loves her family, fiercely, completely, in ways that overflow her usual containment, because love is the thing she built herself toward after leaving behind everything she'd been given. Now, let's talk about Richard. Richard Watterson is, on the surface, a comedic archetype. The bumbling sitcom dad. Homer Simpson in rabbit form. Big, warm, incapable of functioning as an adult, constantly causing problems through incompetence rather than malice. He sleeps, he eats, he watches television. He manages to make even grocery shopping catastrophic. He is, by his own assessment, and by the show's repeated confirmation, the laziest person in Elmore. But there's a reason he's the laziest person in Elmore. Not just a personality reason, a structural one. In an episode called The Job, Richard gets hired as a pizza delivery man. He takes on a job. He becomes productive. He takes on responsibility, handles it with something approaching competence, and the result, the literal, physical, observable result in the world of Elmore, is that reality begins to collapse. The sky cracks. Physics breaks down. The laws of the universe start failing in real time. Gumball, Darwin, and Nicole have to race against time to get Richard fired before the entire fabric of reality tears itself apart. Richard cannot have a job. This is not a metaphor. This is a literal law of the universe in Elmore. The world has designated a role for Richard Watterson, and that role is do nothing. Be home. Be useless. Be the soft, warm, sleeping presence in the center of the house. And any deviation from that role does not just inconvenience the universe, it unmakes it. That's not laziness. That's a prison. A very comfortable, very warm prison with good snacks and an excellent television setup, but a prison nonetheless. Richard hasn't chosen to be useless. The universe has decided that his uselessness is load-bearing. His inaction is a structural necessity. He is cosmically neutered, constrained to his couch by forces entirely beyond his control or understanding. And the show plays this as one of its funniest premises while simultaneously offering it as one of its most melancholy ones. But we know from the episode The Choices that Richard's mother, Granny JoJo, was smotheringly overprotective. She wrapped everything in metaphorical bubble wrap. She couldn't let him grow up. She kept him in a state of perpetual childhood, shot down his dreams, controlled his environment so thoroughly that he never got the chance to develop any competence at navigating the adult world. And his father, Frankie Watterson, was a con man who abandoned the family when Richard was young. He showed Richard, early and conclusively, that adult men cannot be trusted, that authority figures don't stay, that the world beyond the protected bubble of JoJo's care is dangerous and unreliable. Richard never had the tools to become an adult. The mother who loved him kept him from becoming one. And the father, who was supposed to model adulthood, chose absence instead. So he stayed young, stayed home, stayed in the comfortable space between childhood and the world, eating and sleeping and being warm and not knowing that anything was wrong. And then there's the thing the show says about him that I think is its most quietly extraordinary insight. Richard is, despite all of this, despite the uselessness, the incompetence, the utter inability to function as a conventional adult, a wonderful father. Not a good father in the ways society defines a good father, but wonderful in the specific, essential, irreplaceable way that matters most for the Watterson children. He is present, he is warm, he plays with his kids, he is emotionally available in ways that Nicole, who carries so much, sometimes cannot be. And he is the safe place in the house. He is the soft landing. He is the parent who never makes his children feel like they need to be more than they are, who loves them unconditionally and constantly, and without the performance of achievement that Nicole's childhood forced into her. Nicole's children will not grow up the way Nicole grew up. They will not be told that second place is first place for losers. They will not be expected to be extraordinary as a prerequisite for love. And a significant part of why they won't is Richard. Not because he has figured out the right parenting philosophy, but because he is, by nature and by trauma and by cosmic mandate, exactly the opposite of what Nicole's parents were. His gift to his children is the gift his parents couldn't give him: permission to be imperfect. The universe won't let him have a job. Fine, but it can't take away what he is at home, and what he is at home is, in the ways that matter most, exactly what his family needs. There's an episode called The Authority that I want to highlight here because it shows Richard doing something that, for me, reframes everything else about his character. Granny JoJo comes to visit, and horrified by what she perceives as the chaos of the Watterson household, she takes over. She wraps everything in metaphorical and literal bubble wrap. She puts helmets on the kids. She turns the house into a padded cell and tries to prevent the children from experiencing anything that might conceivably hurt them. She's doing exactly what she did to Richard, protecting so completely that the thing being protected never gets the chance to grow. And Richard fights back, not aggressively, not with anger, but with real, quiet, purposeful resistance. He insists that his kids need freedom, that they need to make mistakes, that the job of a parent isn't to prevent all harm, but to make sure your children have the capacity to handle harm when it comes, which it will come because the world is not made of bubble wrap. He learned at some cost what overprotection does to a person. He watched it happen to him, and he is absolutely determined not to pass that particular inheritance to his children. That's the most heroic thing Richard Watterson does in the entire series. Not the moments where he accidentally saves the day, not the physical comedy. This. The quiet, daily, invisible work of not becoming his mother. The choosing, again and again, to give his children the freedom he was never given, even when every instinct he has says to wrap them up and keep them safe. He's breaking a cycle without fully understanding that he's breaking it. He just knows that how he was raised didn't serve him, and he wants something different for his kids. That's not philosophical insight. That's love operating below the level of language. And here's the thing that I think ties Nicole and Richard together in the most meaningful way the show can offer. They are each, separately, carrying damage. Nicole carries her parents' perfectionism and her father's rage, and the long echo of a childhood that told her nothing she ever did was enough. Richard carries the permanent childhood his mother gave him and the abandonment of a father who modeled disappearance as a response to difficulty. They are both, in different ways, still living in the houses they grew up in, still moving through the patterns those houses established, still fighting against tendencies they didn't choose and can't fully shake. But they found each other. And in finding each other, they found someone whose particular damage was exactly suited to complement their own. Nicole's hypercompetence and Richard's infinite gentleness, her need to fix things and his contentment with things as they are, her fire and his warmth. They're not a perfect couple in any conventional sense, but they're the right couple for each other in a way that the show earns, emotionally in the choices, in a way that leaves very little room for doubt. And the children they're raising, messy, strange, funny, imperfect, brilliant in different ways, are the best evidence that their love is working. Not because the kids are perfect, because they're alive and curious and capable of kindness and walking around in the world with the tools to survive it. That's the whole point. That's everything. The family therapy reading of Gumball is one of the show's most underappreciated dimensions. Every Watterson carries something they inherited and didn't choose. Every episode where Nicole can't stop being perfect, or Richard can't manage to function, or Gumball self-destructs in a situation that required patience. These are the show documenting the cycle in real time. The cycle of patterns passed down through families. The way damage shapes damage across generations. The way love and harm can exist in the same relationship without either canceling the other out. And then every episode where Nicole laughs instead of rages, or Richard stands up for his children's autonomy, or Gumball chooses to be honest instead of clever. These are the show documenting the breaking of the cycle. The moments where someone manages to be better than what they were given. Small moments, ordinary seeming moments, moments that happen in 11-minute animated episodes and are gone before the commercial break. But they happened. And in Elmore, what happened matters. Even if the reset comes. Even if everyone forgets. It happened, and that means something, even in a world that's made of television static all the way down. That's the dark theory of Richard Watterson. Not that he's lazy, that he wanted more and the world wouldn't allow it. That he is, inside the comedy, a man who is both victimized by the structure of his world and who has, somehow, been managed to turn his constraints into a form of love. Section 6. Darwin, Penny, and Aeneas. 3 questions about identity. 3 characters. 3 different questions about what it means to be yourself when the self you are was in some fundamental way given to you. Start with Darwin. Darwin Raglan. Caspian Ahab. Poseidon Nicodemus Watterson III, and yes, that is his full name, revealed in a Season 1 episode, is the best friend and adopted brother of Gumball Watterson. He is an orange goldfish who grew legs. Before that, he was just a goldfish, one of several replacement fish the Wattersons bought after a string of predecessor Darwins died. This particular Darwin was the 6th, or the 7th. Depending on which episode's count you trust, the point is, he was a fish. A normal, regular, non-sentient goldfish swimming in a bowl, completely unaware of the world around him, processing reality through whatever limited sense organs a fish processes reality through. And then he wasn't. One day, speaking for the first time, he startled Nicole and Richard so thoroughly that they accidentally knocked him off the counter, and he went down the toilet and into the sewer and eventually out to sea. And he wanted to come home. He wanted to get back to Gumball. And in the 2-part Season 4 origin story that covers this, the show's explanation for what happened next is as straightforward and wonderful as anything in the series. Gumball's love transformed him. Gumball's refusal to give up on Darwin, his absolute certainty that Darwin was coming back, somehow transmitted itself through whatever mechanism governs Elmore and gave Darwin what he needed to survive. He grew legs, and he grew lungs. He walked across a city on those new legs, breathing with those new lungs to get back to the family that was waiting for him. It's beautiful. I cried the first time I watched it. I probably cried the second time too. The show frames it as pure, uncomplicated love. A child loving his pet so completely that the universe responded to that love. But there's another way to read it. Darwin didn't choose to evolve. Darwin had no agency in his transformation. The universe, or the narrative, or whatever force governs what things are allowed to be in Elmore, looked at this fish and decided, this needs to be a character. And so it gave the fish character. It gave him legs and lungs and speech and feeling, and a moral framework and a personality and a best friend and a whole life. It took something that was a pet and made it a person. Why? Because the story needed a person there. And that raises the question, a question the show occasionally brushes against without quite answering, of whether the person it made is actually Darwin, or whether Darwin is a personality that was assigned to a fish. Whether the kindness and optimism and loyalty and sweetness that we recognize as Darwin are genuinely his, or whether they're the traits the universe required for the role of Gumball's best friend and moral counterweight. Whether Darwin, the person, is a naturally occurring consciousness or a character written over a fish. The show doesn't answer this. It shouldn't. The question is the point, and there are moments where the mask slips in ways that suggest the show knows exactly what it's doing with this ambiguity. In the words, when a strange quirk frees Darwin from social inhibition, what pours out of him is not just honesty, but accumulated frustration. The things he finds annoying, the resentments he's been storing, the ways in which his relentless positivity has required constant suppression of negative reactions. His natural state, unleashed, is not sweetness. It's a complex tangle of genuine feeling, some of it quite dark. And in The Puppets, the bizarre, unforgettable crossover with Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared. Darwin gets controlled by a puppet, and the puppet tells him he's not really alive. He's just a character in a show. Darwin's reaction is terror, not confusion, not philosophical engagement. Primal, visceral, undeniable terror, because he knows. On some level, underneath all the warmth and loyalty and sweetness, Darwin knows. And knowing terrifies him. Now let's move to Penny. Penny Fitzgerald is an anthropomorphic peanut, or she was for the first 3 seasons. Like the rest of her family, she wore a shell, a hard, protective, contained exterior that covered whatever she really was underneath. She was cheerful and sweet and athletic and in a barely concealed, mutually acknowledged, absolutely agonizing years-long romantic standoff with Gumball, and she was a peanut with antlers, and that seemed to be the whole story. Then in The Shell, Season 3, Gumball accidentally cracks her open during a school play. And what's inside is not another peanut. It's something else entirely. Penny is a shape-shifting fairy. Without her shell, she transforms based on her emotional state. Happy and secure, she's luminous, winged, glowing, ethereal, but beautiful in a way that doesn't quite follow the normal rules of what beautiful means. Afraid or self-loathing, she becomes a beast, a monster, something enormous and dark and frightening. Her body is a direct physical expression of how she feels about herself. She can't hide it. She can't perform fine. She can't keep a neutral face and power through a bad moment. She wears her interior on her exterior, completely, at all times. Her father Patrick's reaction to this revelation is fear. Fury. He wants the shell back on. He wants her fix, odd. He plans to transfer her to a different school to hide her, to contain what she is back inside the thing that covered it, because what she is without the shell is dangerous and unstable and not what the family needs. He calls her true form something to be managed, something to be protected against. And Penny runs. She transforms into the monster she believes everyone thinks she is. She runs through Elmore while the city responds exactly as she feared. Pest control gets called, people scatter. The world confirms her worst beliefs about herself. Until Gumball catches up to her, and doesn't flinch, and tells her she's beautiful. Not despite what she looks like, not regardless of what she looks like, because of it. Just, you're beautiful. I like you. Stay. And she does. The Shell, as the show makes explicit over the following seasons, particularly in the transformation and in the Amadane from the revival series, is a metaphor with layers upon layers. It's about the masks families make children wear. It's about the version of yourself you present to be acceptable, and the version you suppress to be safe. It's about the way certain truths about yourself, truths about identity, about how you feel, about who you love or what you need, get covered over because someone decided those truths were dangerous. The Fitzgerald family has been wearing shells for generations. The tradition was passed down not as cruelty, but as protection. The official explanation, eventually revealed, is that uncontrolled Fitzgerald shapeshifting can hurt the people nearby. The shells protect others from them. But shells also prevent others from knowing them, and they prevent Fitzgeralds from knowing themselves. Penny was the first of her family to break the cycle. The first to say, I would rather be known, even if being known is dangerous. Even if being seen means being vulnerable. Even if the cost of authenticity is my father's anger and my family's fear. And I would rather be real than be safe. In a show full of characters struggling against the roles assigned to them, Penny's arc is about choosing visibility over protection. About deciding that the version of yourself that the world can see is worth more than the version that keeps everyone comfortable. It's a choice that costs her significantly in the short term. And it's also, the show argues, the only choice that leads anywhere worth my going. Finally, let's talk about Aeneas. Aeneas Watterson is 4 years old. She is in the same class as her 12-year-old brother because she is a genius. Intellectually off the charts, capable of advanced mathematics and multiple languages, and a level of analytical reasoning that outstrips most adults in Elmore. She is, in many ways, the most practically competent member of the Watterson family. Yeah, she is also the loneliest character in the show. She's too smart for children her age. She's too young for the age group she's been placed in. She drives away potential friends with a combination of intensity and clinginess and a conversational default mode that most 10-year-olds find deeply uncomfortable. She's caught between two worlds and fully at home in neither. In The Friend, she creates an imaginary companion. A terrifying, violent, imaginary friend. Because this is Gumball and nothing is quite normal. But still an imaginary friend, because the real ones keep not working out. There's a scene in The Oracle, the episode that introduces Banana Barbara's prophetic paintings, where Anais, watching events unfold exactly as a painting predicted, turns to the camera and asks, "Would any of this have happened if we hadn't seen the painting?" She's asking about determinism, about whether seeing the future caused the future, about whether free will exists or whether the universe's narrative is so fixed that knowing it changes nothing. She's 4 years old and she's asking about the foundational questions of philosophy. And she's not asking casually. She's asking because the answer matters to her. Because Anais' survival mechanism is understanding. She builds models of how the world works, and she navigates by those models, and she needs those models to be accurate. She needs to understand because understanding is what she has instead of the easy social connections she can't quite manage. And if the model of reality she's built turns out to be fundamentally wrong, if the universe's story is already written and her understanding of it is just a form of catching up rather than actually comprehending, then what does she have left? The show hints in several places that Aeneas is the character most at risk from awareness. Not the void exactly. She's far too interesting to be declared a mistake. But awareness itself. The same sharpness that makes her exceptional also makes her capable of noticing the things about Elmore that are wrong. The resets, the inconsistencies, the moments where the logic doesn't add up. And in a world where certain kinds of knowledge are actively dangerous to the stability of existence, a 4-year-old genius who notices everything is an accident waiting to happen. She carries knowledge she's too young to carry. She lives among people she's too young to fully understand. She is, in the most literal sense the show can offer, too much for the world she's in. And she shows up anyway, every episode, in whatever is happening, doing her best to be useful and smart and as connected as she can manage to people who will never quite be able to meet her where she is. In a different show, that would be sad. In this one, it's also funny. And the combination of funny and sad held simultaneously without either canceling the other out is exactly what makes Gumball what it is. There's something specific about Aeneas and Darwin as a pair that I want to name before we move on, because I think it's one of the show's quieter strokes of genius. Darwin is identity by assignment, a being whose entire personality was given to him by the force that made him into a person, who has never known what he was before he was shaped into what the story needed. Aeneas is identity by accumulation, a being who has been building herself out of raw intelligence and lonely observation since she was old enough to notice that she noticed things other people didn't. They're opposite case studies. Darwin is the question, what if who you are was chosen for you and you love it? Does the love make it yours? Aeneas is the question, what if who you are was entirely self-made, but the self you made is too much for the world you're in? Does that make the making worthwhile? The show doesn't answer either question, it just lives with them, episode by episode, with these two characters navigating their respective impossible positions. And somehow the way they navigate together, Darwin's warmth and Aeneas' sharpness and Gumball's chaotic center of gravity, produces something that works. A family that's stranger than any family should be, and more functional than it has any right to be, and full of exactly the kind of love that doesn't require any of its members to be other than what they are. That's the thing about Gumball, finally. Underneath all the philosophy and the existential architecture and the meditation on the nature of fictional existence. It's about a family, a real family in the sense that matters, not biologically coherent, not conventionally functional, not made up of people who match each other or fit neatly into the world or make sense from the outside, but a family that chose each other and keeps choosing each other, day after day, in a world that doesn't promise them anything and might erase them at any moment. That's not a small thing. That's the whole thing. Section 7. The world that keeps itself running. Larry, Banana Barbara, Miss Simeon, and the rest. Every world has people who keep it going. Not the heroes, not the protagonists, not the characters whose names appear in the title. The people in the background. The ones whose labor makes everything else possible and whose presence is so constant, it becomes invisible. Elmore has Larry. Lawrence Needlemeyer, Larry, is a supporting character who appears in essentially every episode of the show. He is the cashier at the supermarket. He is also the clerk at the video rental store, the fast food restaurant employee. Now, the gas station attendant, the mall Santa, the movie theater usher, the ice cream vendor, the pizza delivery manager, the DMV worker, and approximately 34 other jobs besides. He holds, by his own count, in the episode The Menu, 38 different jobs. He makes $7 an hour, and the episode The Night suggests, through a quick visual gag that lands with unexpected weight, that he never sleeps. He works around the clock, every shift, at every business in Elmore, without rest. This is played as a joke. Haha, look at Larry. He's everywhere. He works too many jobs. And it is funny. But then, the pizza happens. In the pizza, the Wattersons disrespect Larry one too many times. They're rude, they're dismissive. They treat him as though his labor and his dignity mean nothing. And he snaps. He quits. He quits all 38 jobs at once. And what happens? Elmore collapses. Society descends into apocalyptic chaos within hours. Stores close, services stop. The infrastructure of an entire town falls apart because one man stopped working. This is not exaggerated for comic effect. Well, it is because this is Gumball and everything is exaggerated. But the principle it's demonstrating is real within the show's logic. Larry Needlemeyer is the linchpin of Elmore's economy. He is single-handedly the mechanism that keeps civilization running. The world needs him, which means the world will never let him go. Think about that. Think about what it means to be the most essential person in your community, the person without whom everything fails, and to know that this necessity is a form of bondage. Larry cannot retire, Larry cannot take a vacation, but Larry cannot have a bad week or a sick day, or just one morning where he doesn't get out of bed. Because if he does, everything around him suffers. He's trapped by his own indispensability. The parallel with Rob is precise and devastating. Rob was thrown into the void for being useless. Larry is enslaved in existence for being essential. Two sides of the same coin. In Elmore, your existence is either irrelevant enough to be deleted or necessary enough to be imprisoned. There is no version of mattering where you are also free. Now let's move to someone who matters in a completely different way. Banana Barbara is Banana Joe's mother. She's a banana. She wears a bow on her head because without it, the show implies she might literally come apart. She's eccentric in a way that reads initially as comedic absent-mindedness. She shows up in karaoke videos seemingly by accident. She gets lost in Christmas stockings. She paints. Constantly, obsessively, she paints. And her paintings are prophecy, not metaphorical prophecy. Literal, precise, specific prophecy. Every painting Barbara has ever made has come true. Every one. The Oracle, a Season 3 episode, demonstrates this by showing a painting that depicts Gumball ending up naked on television and then following the chain of events that leads, inevitably and ridiculously, to exactly that outcome. Anais asks her quiet, devastating question about determinism. And the painting on the wall in Barbara's home is already the next thing. In the Season 6 episodes, The Future and the Inquisition, Rob kidnaps Barbara specifically because of her ability. He needs to know what's coming. He needs to see the future of Elmore so he can prepare, so he can find a way to save everyone. And Barbara paints the future for him. She tries and tries, and every time she tries, all she gets is static. Not imagery, not visions of people running or buildings falling or the void consuming. Just static. Gray, featureless, signalless, static. Static. There is no future, she says. That flat, eerie delivery. There is no future. What makes Barbara extraordinary within the show's mythology is that her ability came from trauma. The show tells us in the future that Barbara used to be normal, competent, sharp, professionally functional. She worked at Shinax Inc., and the stress of corporate overwork caused a breakdown. A complete, catastrophic burnout. After that, she became the eccentric, scattered, bow-wearing figure we know. Had her prophetic abilities emerged from her breakdown? Her mind shattered, and in the shattering, it opened up to something vast and strange and not entirely welcome. She can see the truth. She has always been painting the truth. But the truth of what she sees destroyed something in her when she first started seeing it, and now she lives half in the world and half somewhere else, and the paintings pile up in her garage and nobody understands them until after they've already come true, and the last thing she can paint is static. She's a Cassandra figure, the prophet who sees clearly but can't be understood in time to matter. She knows what's coming, she's always known, and she paints it faithfully, in her garage while her husband takes baths and her son tells jokes at school, because that's what you do with knowledge that nobody will believe. Like you paint it, you put it on the wall, you wait. And then there's Miss Simeon. Miss Simeon, Lucy Simeon, is Gumball's teacher at Elmore Junior High. She has been a teacher for a very long time. The show establishes across multiple episodes that she has been alive and teaching for approximately 2 million years. She predates recorded history, she predates agriculture, she predates the existence of human civilization as we understand it. She is an ancient being from before the development of language as we know it, and she has been grading papers and disciplining children and standing at the front of a classroom for longer than most geological eras. And she hates it. She hates her students. She hates her job. She hates Gumball with a particular and personal intensity, because Gumball represents everything about being a teacher that she finds most exhausting. Cleverness deployed stupidly, potential squandered cheerfully, every rule tested for no better reason than because testing rules is more fun than following them. She's been dealing with students like Gumball for 2 million years. The novelty wore off around the Neolithic period. The dark reading of Miss Simeon is one of the show's best. She's not just a grumpy teacher character deployed as an obstacle. She's a being who has been locked into her role for so long that she's become the role. She was teaching before Elmore existed. She'll presumably be teaching after Elmore is gone. She doesn't remember why she started or what she wanted before this was all she was. Her identity and her function have fused into something indistinguishable. She is the teacher, the way gravity is a force, not because she chose it, but because the universe has made her into it so thoroughly that there is no longer any separation. And her relationship with Principal Brown, who has been at Elmore Junior High for his entire professional life, and who spends most of his time being ineffectually in love with his ancient ape teacher, is its own quiet meditation on what it means to stay. They stay. Not because Elmore is particularly wonderful for either of them, not because they have particularly good experiences there, but because this is where they are and this is who they are here, and the alternative is an unknown vastness that neither of them has the energy to face. There's something almost tender about that, if you look at it from the right angle. Two people choosing each other in a world that keeps threatening to swallow everything, staying in the same difficult place together, not out of happiness, but out of a kind of weary, committed loyalty. The show, being a comedy, plays it differently. But the warmth is there, underneath the jokes, the way it always is in Gumball. In the episode The Joy, and we could talk about The Joy for an entire video on its own, Miss Simeon has what might be her most significant moment in the series. After a joy virus, literally weaponized happiness delivered via what the show calls a wonder hug, begins turning Elmore Junior High's population into euphoric zombies, Miss Simeon remains the last uninfected staff member. She discovers that Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata cures the infection, the virus feeds on happiness, and sadness destroys it. And she sets off through the infected school to reach Principal Brown's office and the cassette player that holds the cure. She disguises herself as one of the infected. She walks through a hallway of happiness zombies, forcing a smile, mimicking their movements, pretending to be something she isn't in order to survive. She's making it. She's almost there. And then she sees Banana Joe and his banana peel is unzipped, and she reaches out in the middle of a zombie apocalypse with her survival depending on invisibility, and she zips it up. She enforces the dress code. She cannot stop being a teacher even when it would kill her. She gets caught, of course. The zombies see her. She barely makes it to the office. And Gumball and Darwin are already waiting inside, infected, and they get her, and she succumbs. And the last thing we see before the episode ends is Miss Simeon, grinning, eyes wide, rainbow fluid on her lips, recording herself on Principal Brown's camcorder saying, "This story has come to a happy ending. The show never resolves this." The next episode, everything is back to normal. Miss Simeon is fine, no explanation offered. The joy virus happened, and then it stopped happening, and the world moved on because the world always moves on. But the image of her, 2 million years old, having survived longer than civilization, finally losing to something as simple and terrible as mandatory joy, there's something about that. Something about the idea that the thing that finally gets you isn't darkness or violence or time. It's the requirement to be happy about everything. The show is making a larger point here, not one that it circles back to in different forms throughout the series. Forced happiness is not happiness. Mandatory joy is not joy. The demand that you smile, that you perform wellness, that you be relentlessly positive and enthusiastic about your existence regardless of how you actually feel. That demand is a form of violence. The joy virus is the most extreme version of what happens when that demand is made absolute. The only healthy response, the episode argues, is to play Beethoven and let yourself be sad for a while. There are a few more characters in Elmore's supporting cast that I want to at least spend a moment with, because the show's philosophical layer extends far beyond the main players. Consider Carrie Kruger. Carrie is a ghost. She's been dead for a long time. The show never specifies how long, which I suspect is intentional. She floats through the halls of Elmore Junior High with her characteristic deadpan and her love of horror, and her very deep, very genuine friendship with Gumball and Darwin, and eventual romantic relationship with Darwin. She is also a dead child. That's what she is. A dead child who goes to school with living children and watches them grow and change and develop and become, and will continue to do so long after they've moved on, because she's not going anywhere. She was 12 when she died, or whatever age she was, and she'll be 12 forever, watching the world turn without her. She can't eat food. She can only taste things by possessing someone else's body, which the show uses for comedy, but which is, if you think about it, the most complete metaphor for a ghost's relationship to life. Yet you can participate in experience. You can feel things by borrowing someone else's capacity to feel, but it's never quite yours. It's always secondhand. It's always someone else's flesh and someone else's hunger that you're temporarily occupying, and then you have to give it back. Her father, the show hints in various places, had a complicated past. The details are vague, and the show keeps them vague on purpose. Knowing would make it too real. Would make you sit with the specific shape of what happened to a specific child, and the show would rather you feel the general weight of it without being required to fully face it. And Darwin loves her. This is the sweet, warm-hearted, incurably optimistic fish who grew legs out of love, who walked across a city to get back to his family. This character is in love with a ghost. So with someone who cannot age, cannot grow, cannot share the physical world with him in the way that most relationships require. Their love is real. The show treats it with genuine tenderness, but it has a built-in expiration date, because Darwin will eventually grow up and move on, and Carrie will still be there, floating through the halls, making sharp observations, and possessing people's bodies to taste sandwiches. That's love under impossible conditions. Not love that fails because people are flawed, but love that is structurally limited by the nature of what each party is. The show doesn't pretend this away. It holds the sweetness and the impossibility at the same time, which is the only honest way to hold that kind of love. Then there's Hector, the giant. Hector is enormous. He literally cannot fit inside most buildings. Yet he participates in normal school activities from a great distance, his face looming through windows, his body too large for any space that was built for the human-scale world. And his mother, who loves him, has raised him with a very specific instruction. Don't feel too much. Because when Hector feels things strongly, joy, sadness, anger, any strong emotion, his size becomes catastrophic. His emotions can shake buildings, can threaten lives. His feelings, literally and physically, are too big for the world they exist in. So she taught him to suppress. She taught him to be calm and contained and minimal in his emotional expression because the alternative is destruction. She wasn't being cruel, she was being practical. But the result is a boy who has grown up learning that his interior life is a danger, that how he feels is a threat to everyone around him, that the safest version of himself is the smallest possible version. Not in body, obviously, because his body is physically vast and uncontainable, but in emotional presence, in the space he allows himself to take up in the world. He is, in the most literal form the show can manage, the child who was told they were too much, too big, too loud, too emotional. Contain yourself, because if you don't, you'll break something. And most of the time, Hector does contain himself. He stands at the edge of scenes, quiet, enormous, watching. He barely registers as a character in most episodes because his function is to not be a disturbance. His mother's training has worked exactly as intended. He takes up enormous physical space and almost no narrative space at all. That the show doesn't resolve this either. Hector doesn't have an arc that ends with him learning to feel freely. He just exists at the margins, enormous and quiet, a daily demonstration of what happens when someone spends their whole life managing themselves for everyone else's comfort. He's the show's most visible, invisible character. And then, finally, there is Sarah G. Leto. Sarah is Elmore's in-universe audience surrogate. She is explicitly described as an obsessive fan of Gumball and Darwin. She writes fan fiction about them. She follows them and documents their adventures and inserts herself into their stories whenever she can. She has studied the structure of their lives from the outside and understands narrative better than any character who's inside it. Just because observing something from outside gives you a perspective that participating in it never can. She is us. She is the viewer watching Gumball's life for entertainment, caring about his relationships more than he does, inserting herself into his world, writing her own versions of his stories. She is the fandom made flesh, and the show's relationship with her is complicated in ways that mirror the complicated relationship every creative work has with its audience. In some episodes, her obsession is played as invasive and concerning. She doesn't respect boundaries. She's too close. She cares too much about people who barely know she exists. In others, she's the most useful person in the room, the one who understands what's happening, who can see the structure of the narrative and describe it clearly while the characters inside it are too close to see anything clearly at all. If Sarah represents the audience, and if the audience's attention is what keeps Elmore alive, then Sarah is one of the most powerful characters in the show. Her watching sustains the world. Her engagement prevents the void from closing in. She's not just a fan, she's a lifeline. And the show's ambivalence about her mirrors the ambivalence that creative works have about their audiences throughout history. You need them to survive, you can't control them, and sometimes their love is indistinguishable from possession. That's uncomfortable to think about. But then, so is most of what Gumball wants you to think about. That's the deal you made when you press play. Section 8. The Grand Unified Theory. What Gumball is really saying. Here is the theory that ties everything together. Elmore is a television show within a television show. The characters are aware, at varying levels, that they're fictional. The void is cancellation. Elmore's universe exists only as long as someone is watching it. And every character's behavior, their comedy, their chaos, their constant entertainment value, their refusal to ever be boring, is an unconscious survival mechanism designed to keep the audience engaged and therefore to keep existing. This isn't a fan theory in the traditional sense, the kind of thing you'd see posted at 2 in the morning, with a string of emojis and very aggressive punctuation. The show confirms most of this explicitly. Rob knows he's fictional. The universal remote controls reality, like a television remote, literally, with buttons for rewind and fast forward and pause, and an AV button that opens a portal to the void. The void runs what look like end credits when characters are ejected into it. The signal shows that Elmore's physical existence is contingent on a functioning broadcast. The episode called The Money shows that when the show's fictional budget runs out, the animation quality degrades and product placements invade the narrative because the show is telling you that its existence is commercially conditional. In The Inquisition, Rob tries to convert the cast into live-action humans so they can survive in the other place, our world, when Elmore ceases to exist. And Ben Bocquelet himself, in interviews about the revival series, Rod was asked directly about whether Elmore is a simulation. His response was, "I have my own theory, which I will not reveal." That response is itself a kind of answer. Some mysteries should stay mysterious. Some answers would diminish the question. And Bocquelet's silence honors the thing he's built. A world where the not knowing is part of the point. But let me apply the theory to what we've already covered, because when you line everything up, the coherence is remarkable. Gumball behaves recklessly, constantly, incorrigibly, without apparent concern for consequences. Because on some level, he knows that boring characters get deleted. His chaos isn't just personality. It's a survival strategy that he doesn't know he's executing. The economist Robin Hanson wrote a paper called How to Live in a Simulation. And a particularly sharp fan noticed that almost everything Hanson suggests a simulation-aware person would do, Gumball does. Be more self-serving. Take reckless risks because the simulation could end at any moment. Try to be as interesting as possible because the more interesting you are, the less likely the simulation is to be turned off. Perform for an audience you can't see. That's Gumball. Episode after episode. Season after season. He's not just a funny cat causing problems. He's a character unconsciously auditioning for his own continued existence. Darwin's impossible evolution from fish to person happened because the narrative needed a sidekick. The universe reshaped a goldfish into a person because the story required a loyal companion for the protagonist, and it gave that person exactly the qualities a sidekick requires. Darwin's sweetness, his loyalty, his moral sensitivity, all the traits we love him for, are precisely the traits the narrative required. This doesn't make them less real, but it raises the question of whether there's a distinction between who Darwin is and what the story needed him to be. Nicole is superhuman because the narrative needs a safety net. Without a competent adult in the Watterson household, the story collapses. She carries the family because if she doesn't, there is no episode. Her strength is not just characterization, it's structural necessity wearing the face of personality. Richard is lazy because the universe won't let him be otherwise. The Job episode isn't just a joke about uselessness. It's the show making literal and visible the way narrative requirements dictate character reality. Richard's role is to be home, to be the warm constant, to be the soft, loving, unchanging center of the Watterson house. And the universe enforces this role with physical force because the story needs it. Larry works 38 jobs because the narrative needs someone to populate every location. He's not a person in the story's economy. He's infrastructure given consciousness. His existence is the show's way of giving faces to the invisible labor that makes a world run, and also the show's way of indicting the invisibility of that labor. Penny hid in a shell because the story wasn't ready to reveal her true form until season 3. Her suppression was not just family pressure. It was, within the grand unified theory of Elmore, literal plot structure. The story needed to hold her back until the moment her revelation would have maximum emotional impact. Rob was erased because background characters don't matter to the story. He came back because conflict needs a villain. His entire identity, the one he built from scratch in the Watterson basement, the villain role he chose because it was the only one available, was dictated by narrative requirements. He is the character who saw the cage most clearly and could not stop seeing it and could not find a door. Banana Barbara can see the future because the future is already written. Her paintings aren't prophecy, they're spoilers. Elmore's future has already been determined by whoever is telling this story, and Barbara's mind, cracked open by trauma, can access that predetermined narrative directly. She paints what's going to happen not because she has supernatural insight, but because she can see the script. And the void isn't a metaphor for cancellation. It is cancellation. When the show ends, Elmore ends. When the audience stops watching, the characters stop existing. The void isn't some cosmic force with its own agenda, it's us. Changing the channel. This is the show's final, most audacious philosophical claim, and it makes everything else, every dark implication, every character's hidden tragedy, every moment of comedy that contains a quiet scream, make perfect out sense. The characters of Elmore exist at the pleasure of an audience. Every performance they give, every laugh they generate, every moment of connection and chaos and love and loss, it all serves the same ultimate purpose: keeping the audience watching, keeping the signal alive, keeping the void at bay for one more episode. They don't know this consciously, most of them, but they act as though they know. They act as though they feel it. This constant background urgency to be interesting, to be entertaining, to never be boring, to never be the kind of character the universe decides it doesn't need. The comedy of Elmore is the survival instinct of every person who has ever been afraid of becoming forgettable. And that's the real reason this show hits the way it does at 2 in the morning. Because at 2 in the morning, you know something that feels less abstract than it did at noon. You know that days pass and memories fade and people get busy and weeks go by and suddenly you can't remember the last time someone remembered you unprompted, the last time you were someone's first thought rather than an afterthought, on the last time you felt like you were important enough to exist at the center of anyone's story. That fear, the fear of disappearing without being noticed, of being quietly declared a mistake, of being erased from the memories of the people around you because you weren't interesting enough to keep, that's not a fear unique to animated characters. That's the oldest fear. That's the fear underneath most of the other fears. That's what the void actually is. Let me also spend a moment with something the show does that I think is philosophically rich and often overlooked. The show returned from the original run's cliffhanger ending with The Wonderfully Weird World of Gumball on Hulu in July 2025, and the revival doesn't just pick up where things left off. It grapples in new ways with the questions the original series raised. Rob's arc continues, with him now operating as a guardian of Elmore rather than its antagonist. The threats the void represents are evolved. The characters have to face, in more direct terms than before, the question of what it means to choose to live in a world that knows it's a fiction and chooses to be one anyway. That's a profound act of creative courage on Bockley's part. Not every show that runs long enough to become aware of its own mythology has the nerve to make that mythology the actual subject matter. Most shows that flirt with metafiction eventually retreat back to the comfort of pretending the fourth wall doesn't exist. Gumball walked through the fourth wall and didn't come back. It lives on the other side now, in a place where the questions it started asking have become the story itself. What does it mean to continue? What does it mean to choose existence in full knowledge of its contingency? What does it mean to love something that might be erased? What does it mean to be the audience of a story you care about, knowing that your attention is what keeps it alive, knowing that the day you stop watching is the day the void wins? The show doesn't answer, it asks. And the asking, sustained over years and seasons, and a revival and more to come, is its own kind of answer. As long as anyone is asking, the story continues. As long as anyone cares enough to follow the signal transmits. The story doesn't need to be resolved to be real. It just needs to be watched. And here's the thing about that. Here's the thing I keep coming back to in the quiet hours. Thinking about Elmore and the characters who live there and the philosophy hidden in the furniture of what looks like a children's show. It's not just about fiction. Every relationship you have is a story that exists as long as both people tend it. Every friendship, every love, every connection between human beings is a signal that needs to be transmitted to survive. When you stop showing up, when you stop paying attention, when you let the demands of everything else crowd out the signal of what you care about, that's the void. That's what it looks like in real life. Not a dimension of television static, just the slow fading of something that needed you to keep it alive. And you got busy, and now it's gone. Gumball is a show about a cartoon world that can be canceled. But the thing it's really about is the way every good thing requires active maintenance, requires showing up, requires the willingness to keep watching, to keep caring, to keep sending the signal even when the return seems uncertain. The characters of Elmore exist at the pleasure of an audience, and so, in a different way, does every relationship you're in. We keep each other from the void. That's what community is. That's what love is. That's what staying connected means, through all the noise and the distance and the times when it would be easier to let things go quiet. You keep the signal alive. You keep watching. You choose again and again to be the person who remembers. That's not a small thing to take away from a cartoon about a blue cat. But that's Gumball. It never was a small thing. Before I bring this home, I want to spend a little time on the protagonist himself, because I've been talking around him and it's time to talk about him directly. Gumball Watterson is on every visible surface a straightforward comedic lead. He's impulsive. He's occasionally selfish. He's genuinely clever in ways he rarely deploys carefully. He cares deeply about the people in his life while also being constitutionally incapable of thinking about the consequences of his actions for more than about 30 seconds at a time. He is lovable and infuriating in equal measure, and the show is honest about both in a way that makes him feel real rather than merely likable. But there's an episode called The Name, Season 3, that I've been saving because it contains what I think is the show's most direct and most unsettling statement about identity. And it uses Gumball as the vehicle. We learn in The Name that Gumball's real name isn't Gumball. His legal name is Zach. Zach Watterson. Gumball was a nickname that stuck when he was very young, and it stuck so thoroughly that his legal name was essentially abandoned. But when the legal situation comes to light when the name Zach is officially invoked, something alarming happens. An alternate personality begins to emerge. A personality named Zach. And Zach is everything Gumball isn't. Confident in a cold way, aggressive, calculating, self-interested without the warmth that makes Gumball's self-interest bearable. Zach begins to take over, begins to replace Gumball. And the family has to literally go to court to change the legal name back to Gumball because that name, that nickname, that accidental identity is what keeps the person they love in place. Think about what the show is saying there. Gumball, the kind, chaotic, fundamentally sweet character we've spent seasons with, is not the original. He's the override. The real kid, the legal kid, the kid who was there from the beginning is Zach. And Zach got suppressed and replaced by a personality that was better suited to the cartoon he lives in. The identity we know and love is a correction, an edit, a version of a person that emerged because the original version didn't fit. This is almost unbearably meta when you know that Bakalay's original concept for the show had Gumball as a black cat, not a blue one. The original pitch had different characters, a different premise, a different version of everything. So the Gumball we know is already a revision of a revision. He's already an edited version of a character that the creative process determined wasn't quite right. And the show, knowing this about itself, wrote it into the character's history. The Gumball we know replaced someone else. His very existence is a narrative rewrite. But here's where the dark reading opens into something warmer. The family fights for Gumball. They go to court. They insist that the name, the accident of a childhood nickname, the thing that has no legal standing but enormous emotional weight, is the truth of who this person is. Not the legal name, not the original version, the one they know, the one they love, the one that emerged through the accident of living with them. Your name, the show argues through this episode, is not the name on your birth certificate. Yeah, it's the name that people who love you use when they're happy to see you. Your identity is not the original template you were born with. It's the version of yourself that you became in relationship with the people who mattered enough to shape you. That version might be an edit. It might be a correction. It might have replaced something else that was there before. But it's still yours. It's the most yours thing there is. Gumball is Gumball because his family says so. And that, the show insists, is sufficient. That's enough to make it real. That's enough to make it worth fighting for. The show has a complicated relationship with the idea of authenticity throughout, whether Darwin's goodness is real because it was assigned, whether Penny's true form is more genuine than her shell, whether Nicole's rage is her or her inheritance, on whether any of the characters are really themselves or just the selves their circumstances produced. And the answer it keeps arriving at in different ways and through different characters is yes. You are real. The version of you that exists, regardless of how it got to be what it is, regardless of what determined it or shaped it or assigned it, that version is you. That's the one that counts. That's the one your family goes to court for. And that, finally, is the philosophical bottom of the show. Underneath the void and the reset and the metafiction and the cosmological horror of conditional existence. Underneath all of it, the show believes in the reality of the selves its characters have become. It believes those selves are worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth building a whole town to house and a whole series to document, and a whole season 6 finale to end on a freeze frame of the character who cared most about all of them falling into the darkness. The void is real. The signal is fragile. The future is static. And the characters of Elmore are real and they love each other and they keep going. That's the whole thing. That's everything. And that, I think, is where we have to sit for a moment before the closing. Because there's something the show does, quietly, in every single episode, that I haven't named directly yet. Something that lives underneath even the philosophy and the dark theories and the cosmological architecture of the void and all the rest of it. The show keeps going. Not in the plot continuity sense, though it does that too, but in a more fundamental sense. Every episode, and after whatever catastrophe occurred in the previous one, the Watterson family wakes up. They have breakfast, they go to school, they argue and make up and cause problems and fix some of them and leave others behind and go home. The day happens. And then another day happens. And the show keeps tracking these days. These specific, particular, often disastrous but occasionally beautiful days, with the attention and care of someone who genuinely believes the days are worth tracking. There's a kind of radical ordinariness to that. In a show that is actively aware of its own existential stakes, that knows the void is real and cancellation is death, and the reset is a form of cosmic amnesia. In that show, the day still happens. Gumball still has to go to school. Darwin still has to navigate his friendships. Nicole still has to make dinner and hold the family together and deal with her impossible parents and manage her impossible temper and love her impossible family. Richard still has to be the warm, useless, irreplaceable heart of the household. Aeneas still has to be 4 years old and the smartest person in every room and utterly, completely alone in her understanding of things. The day happens. It keeps happening. And the show keeps paying attention to it. That's the philosophy underneath the philosophy. Not just that existence is contingent and the void is real and nothing is guaranteed, but that given all of that, given the full weight of everything the show knows about the precariousness of being, given all of it, the day still matters. The ordinary moments still matter. That the argument over breakfast and the accidental kindness and the disaster that turns into an adventure and the adventure that turns into something almost like wisdom, and then the reset, and then the next day. It matters because it happened. Even if the void takes it, it happened. Even if nobody remembers, it happened. Even if the signal degrades and the world goes to static, and every memory of Elmore is swallowed by the dark. It still happened. Gumball and Darwin still ran through those streets. Nicole still held her family together with her bare hands. Richard still fell asleep on that couch and was warm and present and exactly himself. Penny still came out of her shell. Rob still gave up his reconciliation to fix the damage he'd caused, quietly, with nobody watching, with nobody to ever know. It happened. The show says that matters. The show insists on it, episode after episode, season after season, in the face of everything it knows about how little the universe cares about the mattering of small things. That insistence is what I love most about it. That stubborn, cheerful, fundamentally kind insistence that the ordinary days are worth your full attention. That the people you're with right now, in whatever strange and impossible configuration life has put you in, are worth your love and your care and your presence. That the signal is worth maintaining even when it's fragile. Even when the static is getting louder. Even when there might not be a future. There is now, there is right now, there is this, and that's enough to keep going. Ben Bacalé built Elmore out of rejected things, characters nobody wanted, given a world they didn't fit, trying to make something worth watching together. He named the family after his own family. He gave his rejected characters a home, and then, within the logic of that home, made the question of whether they deserved to stay the central philosophical question of the entire series. And the answer he wrote over 6 seasons and 240 episodes, and one extraordinary cliffhanger and a revival and a movie and more to come. The answer is maybe. Maybe you deserve to stay. Maybe the void will hold off for another season. Maybe the audience will keep watching. Maybe the signal will hold. It hasn't been certain. It has never been certain. But so far, so good. The void hasn't won yet. Closing, the signal holds. Let me bring it back to where we started. Banana Barbara finishes a painting. She hangs it on the wall with all the others that have come true. She notices a shadow in the painting just completed, a figure standing behind her. She turns. Rob is there. The screen goes dark. And then, painting after painting, you see the static. There is no future. Delivered in that flat, eerie tone. Just those 4 words. I've been thinking about why that line hits the way it does, and I think I finally understand it. It's not because it's saying the world is going to end. It's because it's saying something truer than that. It's saying that no world lasts forever, that every story eventually runs out of signal, that the things we love, the characters we grow attached to, the worlds we return to, the stories we carry with us for years after we first encounter them, all of them depend on someone caring enough to keep them alive. Every beloved thing is finite. Every signal degrades eventually. Everything runs out of future. And Gumball knows this about itself. The show knows. It builds the knowledge of its own mortality into its architecture, into its characters, into its deepest thematic concerns. It lives in full awareness of the void, and it keeps dancing anyway. Keeps being funny, keeps being warm and strange and brilliant. Because that's what you do. That's all you can do. You exist. You make yourself interesting enough to keep existing. You love the people you love as fully as you can manage. You carry what you can carry. You put down what you can't. You try not to let the bad patterns you inherited write your whole story. You find the people who can see you, really see you, all the forms you take, and every shape your emotions put you in. And you stay near them when you can. You keep going, even when the future looks like static, even when the signal is barely holding. You keep going. And that's where I want to leave you tonight. The light is low. The night is quiet. Elmore is still out there. Gumball is still causing problems. Darwin is still choosing kindness. Nicole is still holding everything together with her bare hands. Richard is still on the couch. Rob is still somewhere in the shadows, doing the invisible work that keeps the void from closing in. The signal is holding. The world is still here. You are still here. Whatever time it is, wherever you are, whatever it was that brought you to this video tonight, I hope this helped. I hope the quiet voice and the slow ideas and the gentle walk through one of the most unexpectedly deep worlds that children's animation has ever built gave you something to rest against while the night does its thing. If this video meant something to you, please hit like. If you want more of this, more long-form deep dives into the philosophy and the lore and the hidden depths of shows like this, please subscribe. It keeps the channel going. It keeps the signal alive, as it were. And if you have someone in your life who would appreciate lying in the dark, listening to someone talk about a cartoon banana's prophetic paintings, share this with them. These conversations are better when more people are having them. I'll be back with more. Until then, get some sleep. The void is sleeping too, for now.